Today's world is undergoing changes unseen in a century. Profound and historic shifts are unfolding in the international landscape. The global south, represented by China and Africa, is rising with unstoppable momentum. At the same time, the world remains far from peaceful. The law of the jungle is re-emerging. Power politics and bullying are being openly practiced. International law and the basic norms governing international relations are being violated. The legitimate claims and interests of developing countries are being harmed, and the development of the global south is being disrupted. In the face of a world marked by turbulence and transformation, China and Africa need more than ever to uphold fairness and justice, strengthen unity and mutual assistance, and enhance exchanges and cooperation.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Africa for a four-nation tour that takes him to Ethiopia, Somalia, Tanzania and Lesotho. However, the Somalia visit has been postponed to a later date. The visit, an annual tradition upheld for over 3 decades, is highly significant as it underpins Africa's priority status in China's foreign policy. This year's visit, like those that have preceded it, blends high-level political symbolism with substantive economic and strategic engagement, reinforcing a long-standing China-Africa partnership based on principles of sincerity, real results, affinity and good faith. This week on the program, we unpack the significance of the Chinese top diplomat's visit to Africa and explore the key outcomes. I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi attended the launch ceremony of the China-Africa Year of People-to-People Exchanges in Addis Ababa, which unveiled key activities to be carried out throughout the year. This will be guided by the side's principles of people-centered engagement, cross-cultural synergy and shared benefits. Some points of focus will include, first, young leaders, where China and Africa will intensify youth exchanges to encourage mutual learning and foster enduring friendships among the younger generation. Second, culture kaleidoscope, where the two sides will advance exchanges in the fields of culture, tourism, film and television, publishing and sports to promote mutual understanding, mutual affinity and mutual appreciation between the two peoples. Third, livelihood boosters, where both sides will deepen exchanges and cooperation in the areas of health, poverty reduction, public welfare, livelihood and the well-being of people with disabilities to bring more tangible benefits of China-Africa friendship to the people. Fourth, symphony of ideas. China and Africa will step up the exchange of ideas among think tanks, media, and at the people-to-people level to enhance the sharing of experience in national governance and modernization. And lastly, talent incubators, where the two sides will strengthen exchanges and cooperation in education, vocational training, women's empowerment, ICT and AI technologies to translate talent resources into drivers of modernization. Joining me now to unpack Wang Yi's annual visit to Africa are from Johannesburg, Professor David Munyai, Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, and in Nairobi we have James Shikwati, founder of the Inter-Region Economic Network. Welcome to the program and thank you for joining us. Now, let me begin with you, Professor Munyai. This visit marks the 36th consecutive year that a Chinese foreign minister has chosen Africa for their first overseas trip. In a fast-changing world, why does this tradition remain consistent?
I think if you look at the history of the two peoples, Africans and Chinese, I think it is steeped in the struggle for liberation, for economic development, and managing global issues. And at this particular juncture, I think it comes at a time when, as President Xi Jinping put it rightly, changes that are taking place that haven't happened in a century, and major shifts at a global level. And therefore, I think the continent of Africa and China are moving towards a common position on key and strategic issues pertaining to issues affecting their respective regions.
Well, Mr. Shikwati, during his visit to the African Union, Wang Yi noted that China's foreign ministers have made Africa their first overseas destination for 36 consecutive years, reflecting the stability of China's Africa policy. What does this policy stability mean for Africa's development?
Well, it's very much critical, first of all, for us to appreciate the Chinese foreign minister's visit. And then when it comes to the issue of stability, first of all, what we are seeing is the world is in a state of uncertainty and I would say turmoil to some extent. And China has been showing leadership as far as the global south is concerned. And I think the minister's visit to Africa, this being the 36th consecutive visit, is a signal that China looks at Africa as a very critical partner when it comes to stabilizing the world, when it comes to matters, growing the global south and having the African voice elevated at the global level.
Professor Munyae, Foreign Minister Wang Yi is scheduled to visit 4 African countries, Ethiopia, Somalia, Tanzania and Lesotho. Why do you think these 4 African countries have been Wang Yi's destinations this year?
We also have to look into these 4 countries within a global context. One, these countries are some of the most affected by events in the United States. For instance, the ban of people visiting US, the 4 of them have been given restrictive, punitive measures by the President Donald Trump and the US. And we also have seen the tariffs, which has had a huge negative impact. And the bulk of these 4 countries are also in the East Africa, a region that has been affected by terrorism and a number of other issues. And by picking them for China, I think it's a way of saying China remains a reliable partner, a partner that will work with Africa overall and these specific countries. And coming closer to Southern Africa, our own region, Lesotho in particular, I think it is the most affected by the tariffs. And its texture to the US has come to an end. And therefore, I think China will be in a position to open its markets and assist one of the poorest countries on our continent. And therefore, it's critical and they're important countries that China sees as friends rather than threats as the US does.
Okay, Mr. Shikwati, Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting Africa at a time of heightened global political and trade tensions, which have spilled into the continent. How should African nations navigate these tensions while also preserving their right to choose development partners?
I would say when we look at the choice of the 4 countries, as earlier mentioned, I think they indirectly also pass a message of exactly how China and Africa should look at the unfolding global events. Because if you look at Ethiopia, where the minister visited first, that is the headquarters of the African Union. And Ethiopia also hosts a number of UN agencies, if you recall, there's UNECA and the one for Center for Disease Control. These are UN agencies, some of which have already been listed by America to be part of the groups that will not receive support going forward. So from a multilateral point of view, China landing in Ethiopia at this critical moment when US is pulling out of close to 35 agencies is sending a signal that we need to stabilize the multilateral agency. So that's as far as Ethiopia is concerned. And then you notice that the launch for people-to-people partnership is done at the African Union headquarters, which symbolizes the idea that China is approaching Africa as one. And then, of course, for Somalia, we're looking at the aspect of the choke points as far as global trade is concerned. We know that East Africa is really at the center of this turmoil. And therefore, again, China sends a message, look, we need to open our trading corridors to make sure that prosperity is shared. And then when we come to Tanzania, we should not forget Tazara, which is a very old project that China did over 30 years ago. And it really resonates with Africa's quest for continental free trade area. So I think it's a message that, look, we've got these corridors that connect different countries. So we are not just visiting Tanzania, it's symbolic. And then, of course, as professors mentioned, Lesotho then comes in as one of the symbols for what tariff war really did to the continent last year.
Well, Professor Munyai, just as Mr. Shikwati mentioned, this year marks the China-Africa Year of People-to-People Exchanges, and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already released the list of planned activities. From the list, what stands out to you the most, and what potential benefits can people-to-people exchanges bring?
Africa's history with China has been going for more than a century. And if we look at this relationship, the people have always been at the center of this relationship. And therefore, there is absolutely nothing better than bringing back that important element, which is people to people, to ensure that the relationship will strengthen a bit further, far beyond the cabinet ministers, beyond professionals, beyond business people, ordinary people. I think one would see as we go forward more activities at people-to-people level, including sport and other issues for both Chinese and Africans to fully understand each other, to appreciate each other's cultures, civilizations, and ensure that they contribute to global peace and security as equal, with the full understanding and appreciation. China is, through this visit, is continuously sending the message that we do not see Africa as a threat. As a matter of fact, it is an important component to global peace and security.
Well, Mr. Shikwati, we do know that Minister Wang Yi attended the China-Africa Year of People-to-People Exchanges launch ceremony at the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa. What are your expectations regarding this initiative?
I really welcome, first of all, this initiative of people-to-people exchanges, because what we are seeing right now happening globally with the Western world literally walking back from what they have always talked about, rules-based order, a value-based order. I think the people-to-people exchanges between Africa and China starts creating an era of discovery. It's almost very much what happened to Africans in the 1930s, 1940s, when the Africans found themselves getting involved in a war they could not understand what it was all about, only for them to discover that they got the tools they can push for political independence. So I think just beyond the aspect of knowledge, as far as people-to-people is concerned, or tourism and business related. So for me, I would really characterize it as people-to-people exchanges as an era of discovery. But there's something that we've not been able to grapple with in our 8 years of independence in Africa.
All right. We're going to a short break now, and when we come back, we will continue our discussion. Just stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me are Professor David Munyai and Mr. James Shikwati. Now, Professor Munyai, Lesotho is the only Southern African nation on this tour. Given that Lesotho was recently hit by trade shocks arising from U.S. tariffs, you talked about it earlier, how can China's zero tariff policy benefit smaller African economies like Lesotho?
Lesotho is an important country, and It plays a critical role in Southern Africa and in Africa. China, on the other hand, given the previous Forum on China-Africa cooperation, in which China promised to assist the poorest African countries, and we have seen demonstratively in trade, China opening up in agriculture and in a number of areas. I think this is a critical moment in which China could assist a country which is down and under to ensure that its economy stays afloat, and working closely with South Africa and other SADC, as well as at the continental level, in pushing the number of activities in Lesotho that China is involved in, the building of bridges and roads, and quite a number of textile work that Basotho people and Chinese are working together. And therefore, I think it cements that strong relationship between Lesotho and China.
In his meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed spoke very highly of China's efforts in implementing the outcomes of the Beijing Summit of Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC as we simply call it. So which areas stand out for you both in terms of progress made since the 2024 summit? Let's begin with you, Professor Munyai.
There have been a number of key milestones. If we look at what has been achieved, we look at infrastructure. I think massive infrastructure in Kenya, Mombasa, Nairobi, and further infrastructure development within Kenya. In Djibouti, Ethiopia itself, we've seen key strategic infrastructure happening, and the renewal of Tazarab. However, I think we've seen how China is also working with the African continent. One of the key issues that I really admire is to see how Addis Ababa, Africa's political capital, has changed. Small and beautiful initiative in which simply lightening up the city, making it more beautiful, building in smaller yet powerful in terms of integrating the country, bringing in more economic activities in a given country, as well as across its own region. So I think we're seeing a variety of this. The other area that I'm keen and really see is agriculture. I think we've seen activities of China through trade, a modernization of agriculture, using of technology, and therefore instead of depending on the Western world, we see trade between China and Africa increasing with all these activities kicking in, and therefore I think we need to see more of that, and it's all up to Africa itself. China is doing the best it can.
Mr. Shikwati, which areas stand out for you the most?
Yeah, I think for me the most powerful, of course all of them are powerful, is the matters finance, where China has negotiated and discussed with some African countries, Kenya included, Ethiopia included, to be able to repay their debts in Chinese currency. I think that's really revolutionary, where Kenya initially would borrow in US dollars and it's forced to pay back in dollars, spending close to 500 million on top of what they need to be paying. Now, by them converting this into Kenya vis-a-vis Chinese currency, it reduces somehow the burden of the debt. The second one, of course, is digital corridors, if I may use such a term. I think China has really played a critical role in making Africa connect to global digital grids. And that's why, of course, when you talk about cell phone uptake on the continent, maybe what many people might not realize is that the driving force behind it quietly is Chinese. And then I'll look at the green economy when it comes to renewable energy, access to solar powered solutions. I think China is a champion, right from a small user in the village and up to industrial use. I think China has been really big on this. And then, of course, the incoming mobility solutions, which is these are like the electric vehicles. I think Ethiopia already is showcasing the uptake of this. Kenya is trying out with some of the public service vehicles. So I would mention those four as some of the key, but of course, all of them are critical for the transformation of the continent.
Well, Mr. Shikwati, Tanzania and China have a deep historical bond, especially through the Tazara project. You talked about it earlier. How is the Tanzania-China-Zambia Railway Revitalization project a litmus test for the modernization goals set out in the 2024 FOCAC Beijing Summit?
I think what's more exciting about this Tazara project is how China early in the 70s were already thinking in terms of corridors. You notice now when it comes to development, many countries are focusing on how to develop a corridor, logistics corridor, digital corridor, name it. Already China was thinking about corridors in the 70s. So you can imagine what we are calling modernization. In my view, it's just an upgrade of a corridor that already had been established. And now other corridors are being set up to compete with this. We've seen the Lobito corridor coming up, in Angola. So I think that vision that had been set up that early, 30 years plus ago, modernizing it really goes in line with the aspirations of Africa Union, the Continental Free Trade Area. And this is something that I think Tanzania stands as an anchor of a country which way back in the 30s was already willing to open up its space to connect with a neighbor so that the neighbor can access the sea. So I think it's a model in terms of modernization that shows countries that are landlocked that you can still cooperate peacefully, access the seas, and have thriving trade.
All right, so my next question will be to the both of you. I will throw it to you first, Professor Munyae. How can the outlook on peace and development in the Horn of Africa be moved from a diplomatic concept to reality through this visit?
There have been some movements in Somalia or over Somaliland, and therefore I think China is making its case quite clear that it opposes the recognition of Somaliland as a full member state done by Israel, and ensure that the statehood of Somalia is strengthened through infrastructure development, as my colleague has mentioned. And far beyond that, I think we also are starting to see that we going beyond just infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. Ensure that there are activities, industrialization taking place along these belts, along this infrastructure development. And therefore, I think China might stand outside the Western world view. And if we look at Tazara and other corridors that have been built by China, it's going beyond just having a rail or a road. I think working with the African continent, we need to see a much more nuanced way of ensuring that ordinary people benefit from this infrastructure development and thinking in an innovative way, using technology and others. These are the lessons that we've learned from China's own development, and therefore China is leading by doing instead of preaching, as the West does to Africa.
Mr. Shikwati, what are your thoughts on that?
Basically, in terms of peace and security, what China is showing Africa is that they have a partner who is predictable and who is willing to walk the talk and think long term. And secondly, I think what China is showing is that the disruption that are currently happening globally are pointed to a system that has come of age, and therefore Africa needs to rethink a lot of what it has always held as the value approach to how international relations are done, and then come up with new ways. And that's why I think the idea of a continental approach, the way the free trade area promotes, is the best, because if each individual African country decides to do things on their own, the ongoing disruptions, they might not be able to survive. So this joint approach and partnership and win-win approach with the Chinese would be the best way to navigate the unfolding geopolitical tensions.
My final question again will be to the both of you. We live in an increasingly polarized and uncertain world today. So looking ahead at 2026, what are your expectations on China-Africa relations in a shifting geopolitical landscape?
Indeed, I think what we are entering a quite dangerous phase of global history, with the United States attacking Venezuela, attacking Nigeria, an African country, and more crises coming, including in my own country, South Africa, tension with the United States. And I think what China is doing is continuously saying we are here not to cause problem, not to use the power of the gun to ensure that we subjugate you to a colonial pattern of relationship, but rather to work together to find common solution to alleviate people from poverty, and having smaller initiatives and bigger and work together, and also to strengthen multilateralism, ensuring that if United Nations does not work, for instance, when you look where United States is pulling out, China is contributing more resources. One case in point is UNESCO, the World Health Organization, where China, as well as in peacekeeping, and in all what is happening where US is pulling out, affects Africa more than any other continent. And therefore, China is beefing the continent to ensure that we can continue with or without the United States.
Mr. Shikwati?
I would say, yeah, 2026 is going to be very critical and very unpredictable year, given what we've seen in the last 8 days, especially with the US invading Venezuela and also announcing further possibilities to invade other countries. I think what we are going to see China and Africa doing is really to elevate the voice of the global South, and then secondly, to try to pick out what I'll call leverage points, because what's really coming out clearly from the behavior of the United States is they are establishing what they call the leverage points. So one of them being, I can bully you, the army, if you don't deliver on what I ask. So you see, that's a strong leverage point. But then if the global South can speak together, come together, and maybe even use vehicles such as BRICS, so this can create pushback possibilities. And it goes back to the point that no individual African country can really face the changing geopolitical dynamics on their own. This is the time really to work together as a continent and to partner with the strategic partners such as China in order to leverage the bargaining power of African countries. If not, then the powerful ones will keep showing the gunboats at our shores and will keep surrendering to their whims.
Well, thank you very much for that. Very insightful discussion there. But that's all for this edition of Talk Africa. A very big thank you to my guest, Professor David Munyai, Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, and James Shikwati, founder of the Inter-Region Economic Network. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Penina Karibe, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's goodbye.